The fog hung low over the battlefield, thick and suffocating, as distant artillery boomed like the growl of some unseen beast. Boots squelched in the mud, metal groaned, and radios crackled with static and panicked voices. Amid the chaos, a shadowy figure moved with purpose. Lieutenant Elise Martel, a lone female soldier whose every step seemed ordinary until the ground beneath her felt as if it might vanish. Her squad had no idea that this single figure would change everything. A sudden gunshot ripped through the air, followed by frantic whispers, and in that instant, she vanished into the mist, leaving nothing behind but the question, would she ever return? And then, something impossible happened. It was January 1944. Northern France, just months before the tide of the war could turn. Lieutenant Elise Martel was one of the few women trained for covert operations behind enemy lines. Her mission was simple in concept, but deadly in execution: infiltrate an enemy supply depot and gather intelligence that could save hundreds of lives. Failure wasn't just death. It could mean ambushes, civilian casualties, and critical secrets falling into enemy hands. Every movement was a risk. Every second a countdown to disaster. As she checked her gear, her eyes scanning the foggy shadows for threats unseen. No one realized. The real danger hadn't even arrived yet. Something was waiting in the darkness that would challenge everything she knew about war and survival. Minutes into the mission, just as Elise crept through the tangled ruins of what had once been a quiet village, a sudden flare illuminated the sky, burning the fog with a harsh, unnatural light. The once muted sounds of the night exploded into chaos, radio chatter crackling with urgency, distant artillery hammering, and the sharp bark of enemy patrols slicing through the night. Then, a voice broke through the static, icy and precise, delivering a message that would freeze every heartbeat in the command room back at headquarters. Target sighted. Not alone, confusion rippled across the faces of her fellow officers, their eyes darting between blinking radar screens and hastily scrawled maps. Elise froze, heart hammering, sensing instantly that this was no ordinary patrol. It was a signal that someone, somewhere, knew exactly where she was. This wasn't supposed to happen. The mission was designed to be flawless, and yet, the carefully orchestrated plan had already begun to unravel. The message ended with a name that no one recognized, and a cryptic warning that mentioned her specifically, sending a shiver down her spine. Every instinct screamed danger. Every shadow seemed to move with intention. And the silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire itself. Somewhere in the distance, a door slammed, footsteps echoed unnaturally close, and the world narrowed to the sound of her own breath and the pounding of her heart. Who had sent the message, and why single her out? Each second stretched into eternity, and as the night closed in, one terrifying thought became inevitable. The next 90 seconds would determine whether anyone survived, and perhaps whether Elise would ever be seen again. The fog thickened like a living thing, pressing against Elise as she moved through the ruined streets, every step muffled by the squelching mud beneath her boots. Her squad was scattered, radio signals dead or garbled, and the faint glow of distant fires cast grotesque shadows that twisted and danced in the corners of her vision. Explosions erupted in unpredictable patterns. One moment a building crumbled silently into dust. The next, a sudden artillery strike sent shards of brick raining down, cutting a path of destruction just feet from where she crouched. The mission that had seemed daring and calculated hours ago was now pure chaos, and the ground itself seemed to conspire against her, littered with debris, overturned carts, and the detritus of a world at war. Orders were shouted but went unheard. Miscommunications bred panic. Even the most seasoned soldiers faltered as fear clawed at their minds. In the distance, she heard the echoing metallic rasp of a machine gun being deployed, the sharp bark of enemy patrols converging, and the occasional terrified cry of a comrade caught in a crossfire that seemed orchestrated by fate itself. And yet, through all of it, something unnerving persisted. Despite the deadly orchestration around her, no one seemed to notice her directly. Elise moved like a ghost through a storm, unseen and unclaimed. From the command room back at headquarters, officers pored over maps, the pale glow of desk lamps reflecting off sweat-streaked faces. The intelligence reports were contradictory. radar blips unreliable, and the pace of incoming messages too fast to process. It was as if every element of the war had conspired to isolate her from support. On the streets, reinforcements arrived sporadically, misinformed, misaligned, or too late, only to vanish again into the haze, leaving more questions than answers. Weapons jammed at critical moments, radios hissed and died in the middle of frantic transmissions, and coordinates that had been carefully marked seemed to shift under the weight of chaos. As though the city itself was a trap designed to devour those who dared to navigate it. Elise's heart pounded with both fear and determination. She knew every choice she made might be the difference between life and death for herself, her squad, and the civilians whose fates rested unknowingly in her hands. She ducked behind a collapsed wall as tracer. Fire carved lines through the fog, illuminating the eerie ballet of war. Faces flashed in the shadows, some her comrades, others enemies, and perhaps something else entirely before disappearing again into darkness. Fear gripped her chest, yet beneath it, a resolve burned brighter. She could not fail. Every instinct screamed to stay alive, to find cover, to retreat, but retreat was impossible. She was alone in the heart of danger, navigating a battlefield that had become a labyrinth of smoke, fire, and shadows. Every corner, every alleyway, offered potential salvation or sudden death, and she pressed forward, driven by a combination of duty, desperation, and the faint glimmer of hope that she might somehow survive the night. But this wasn't the real problem. Something deeper lurked within the ruins, something that had been waiting patiently, unseen and calculating. A shadow moved in ways that defied explanation, vanishing and reappearing in impossible locations. Elise felt it in the hairs at the back of her neck, prickling awareness that she was not alone in a way that went beyond human presence. Whispers floated on the wind, or was it her imagination? And the terrain itself seemed to shift subtly, paths rearranging themselves, buildings appearing closer or further than they should, as if the battlefield had become alive. Every attempt to regroup her squad was met with failure. Units lost contact, doors slammed on their own, radios hissed static. Panic spread like wildfire, yet Elise remained the eye of the storm. Moving with silent precision, acutely aware that the night held more than just enemy soldiers, the chaos escalated with every passing minute. Explosions echoed, alarms rang, and a relentless tension pressed against every nerve. Soldiers screamed in fear and frustration, commands clashed with counterorders. And in the center of it all, Elise pressed forward, a solitary figure against an incomprehensible tide of war. And just when it seemed the night had reached its peak of terror, the fog parted for a fleeting moment to reveal a glimpse of something possible, a figure or multiple figures moving in perfect silence. Orchestrating events from the shadows, unseen by friend or foe, Elise's breath caught. Every muscle in her body tensed. She knew instinctively that the worst was yet to come. Something larger, something incomprehensible, was approaching, and it would change the mission and her life forever. Night had deepened, but the battlefield seemed to pulse with a life of its own. A chaotic rhythm of gunfire, distant explosions, and the fractured whispers of soldiers struggling to survive. Elise moved with calculated precision. Each step measured against the unpredictability of war, yet the world around her felt unmoored from reason. Enemy patrols had become more aggressive, faster and cunning, exploiting every shadow, every weak corner of crumbling buildings, while allies struggled to coordinate amidst the misfiring radios and conflicting orders that now governed the night. Reinforcements that had been promised were delayed, arriving piecemeal and often too late, leaving fragments of units scattered across streets slick with mud and blood. She could hear the staccato of boots echoing from multiple directions, unsure whether they belonged to friend or foe, and every heartbeat screamed that one misstep could be fatal. The mission itself had become secondary. Survival was now paramount, yet the stakes were higher than ever. Elise faced impossible choices. At one moment, she had to decide whether to risk her own life to pull a wounded comrade from an open street under machine gun fire. The next, whether to abandon critical intelligence that might cost hundreds of lives if it fell into enemy hands. Every decision carried the weight of destiny, the kind that could haunt a soldier forever. The physical strain was immense. Cold seeped through her uniform. Her lungs burned with every sprint, fingers stiffened from mud and grimed, but the psychological burden was crushing. She could feel panic gnawing at the edges of her mind, threatening to crack the composure she had fought so hard to maintain. Yet she pressed on, driven by a resolve forged through training, duty, and sheer instinct. As the night stretched on, betrayal and uncertainty crept into every corner of the mission. Units misinterpreted orders and inadvertently obstructed one another, creating chaos that the enemy exploited with ruthless precision. Explosions erupted from locations that should have been secured. Buildings she had scouted hours earlier now seemed transformed into death traps. Corridors of fire and debris that shifted with every glance. The sounds of battle metal tearing, distant artillery, shouted commands merged into a relentless symphony of chaos, echoing in her skull as if war itself had become a living, breathing predator. Amid this maelstrom, Elise found herself facing moments of surreal heroism, saving soldiers pinned down by gunfire, disarming explosives with trembling hands, making split-second choices that could either doom or save lives. Each act of courage was measured in seconds, each miscalculation potentially fatal. Yet she moved with an uncanny precision, as though guided by an invisible hand. Emotionally, the strain was overwhelming. Messages arrived too late, directives contradicting one another. Letters or notes from home seemed a distant memory, reminders of a world untouched by the horrors surrounding her. Memories flashed in brief, disjointed fragments, a smile from a comrade, a promise made in the warmth of campfires before deployment, the soft weight of a hand held in reassurance. These fleeting moments were both balm and torment, highlighting the stakes of her mission and the fragility of life in this war-torn night. Yet even as despair threatened to take root, moments of near miraculous escape reinforced her resolve. A narrow miss from a collapsing wall, a bullet grazing her sleeve, a shadow in the fog that inexplicably allowed her passage. Every micro-victory carried with it the lingering question: was this luck, skill, or something beyond comprehension? The visual chaos intensified. Flares lit the sky intermittently, casting the ruined streets in stark contrasts. The interplay of light and shadow creating a cinematic theater of fear and suspense. Maps and intercepted signals guided the command room in frantic analysis, yet each discovery seemed to deepen the mystery. Enemy movements defied logic. Reinforcements seemed to appear from nowhere. An unexplainable phenomena, strange sounds, impossible shadows suggested that the night itself had become an ally of uncertainty. Elise's own perception shifted. She felt the air thicken, the fog close in tighter around her, and a palpable sense of being observed in, not just by enemy eyes, but by something inscrutable, something aware of her every move. And then came the moment that would define the night. A sudden, coordinated enemy push threatened to crush her position entirely, cutting off any avenue of retreat. Allies fell back or vanished into the fog. Command signals were drowned in static. Elise was forced to make a split-second decision that defied strategy but preserved life: to move forward, deeper into danger, or to stay and risk annihilation. Every instinct screamed forward. She sprinted across open ground, dodging gunfire, her boots slipping in mud, her breaths ragged and burning, while behind her the world seemed to collapse into darkness and sound. A single misstep would have been fatal, yet she emerged into a narrow corridor between ruins of space no one could anticipate, where the enemy lines inexplicably faltered. As if some unseen force had opened a path, time seemed to stretch, collapse, and pulse with every heartbeat. The crescendo of battle reached a peak, blinking lights from artillery flares, the overlapping chaos of commands and gunfire, the thunder of approaching reinforcements and retreating squads. And in that moment, against every rational calculation, Elise vanished from the eyes of both ally and enemy alike. One moment she was there, moving with human determination, and the next she was gone, swallowed by the night and fog, leaving behind only the echo of boots and whispered fears. Historians would later describe the events as inexplicable, a perfect culmination of chaos, courage, and mystery, a moment where human action intersected with the unknowable. And in that instant, in a moment no historian could explain, everything changed: the mission, the battlefield. In the story of Lieutenant Elise Martel, the woman who walked into the heart of enemy territory and became a living legend of disappearance and courage, the dawn broke slowly over northern France. A pale, ghostly light struggling to pierce the fog and smoke that still clung to the battlefield like a shroud. Silence had settled over the streets, broken only by the distant groan of collapsing buildings and the soft murmur of exhausted soldiers. Elise Martel's squad had regrouped toward what was left of it, faces streaked with mud, sweat, and grief, their eyes haunted by the night's unimaginable events. Supplies were recovered, maps rechecked, but the mission's true objective remained incomplete, and most importantly, Elise was gone. Her comrades searched tirelessly, retracing paths she had taken, scanning rubble and ruins for any sign of her, but the landscape had become a labyrinth of vanished streets and shadows. The last footprints ended abruptly after 12 steps, as if she had simply dissolved into the air. Every soldier who had been near her spoke in hushed, uncertain tones, each account slightly different. Tinged with fear, disbelief, and awe, letters, diaries, and intercepted communications began to surface. Fragments that told a story both heroic and unnerving. One letter from a fellow officer described seeing her silhouette vanish into the fog in a way that defied logic, movements almost supernatural. Another diary entry hinted at whispered voices and shadows that seemed aware of her presence, guiding or protecting her in ways no one could explain. Commanders pored over reports, trying to reconstruct the mission, yet nothing fit the standard protocols of war. Intelligence files revealed strange anomalies. Enemy patrols that should have blocked her path failed to appear. Reinforcements arrived at precisely the wrong times, and surveillance reports contained gaps that suggested she moved through areas under observation yet left no trace. The battlefield itself seemed to hold secrets, and for every explanation, new questions emerged. Even months later, rumors circulated among surviving soldiers and officers. Some claimed she had been captured by a secretive enemy unit. Others whispered she had encountered something beyond human comprehension, a force that had pulled her from the world of the living and into legend. Families wrote letters, hoping for news, clinging to the hope that she might emerge from the fog one day, alive and unbroken, yet none ever did. Archival photographs, black and white and grainy, captured fleeting shadows, unidentifiable figures in the fog, in places where she had once stood, as if the camera had tried to preserve a memory the world had failed to record fully. Historians would later debate the events, some dismissing them as chaos-induced hallucinations, others insisting that the operation had become entwined with something extraordinary, something that defied documentation and explanation. The most chilling revelations emerged years later, when classified files were declassified and scattered eyewitness testimonies reviewed. A hidden depot, previously thought secure, had been compromised weeks before Elise's mission. Unknown operatives, whose names were redacted, had infiltrated enemy lines and left trails that intersected with Elise's path. The implication was unsettling. She had encountered not just enemy forces, but a complex web of agents, double-crosses, and unseen actors whose motives were never fully understood. And yet, no evidence suggested her demise. She had vanished as completely as she had moved, her presence erased from records, leaving only echoes and fragments of memory, the fog of war, the chaos of the battlefield. And the bravery of a single woman converged into a story that would live in whispers, reports, and archival shadows. Lieutenant Elise Martel, the soldier who walked into enemy territory, had become a legend not for victory, nor for defeat, but for her disappearance, a reminder of the fragility of human understanding and the mysteries that linger behind every war. And the truth, that elusive, haunting truth about what she saw and experienced that night, remains locked in archives, waiting for someone brave enough, or perhaps foolish enough to uncover it, even today. When historians pore over old photographs, letters, and battle maps, a certain unease creeps into the mind, footprints that end too soon, shadows that do not belong, a faint whisper in the wind. And those who dare speak of her mission in hushed tones always end the story the same way, and the truth about what she saw that night is still hidden. Somewhere in the fog, beyond reach, beyond comprehension.